Hello, welcome to Carp Fever TV in association with craftycarping.co.uk. Right, we're going to answer a few questions from some of the forum lads. They've sent us a series of questions in that they want answering, so we're going to attempt to answer them for you now. John's going to ask the questions to me, and I will endeavour to try and show you exactly what it is that you require to know.
Right then, Paul, we've got a question off Pac-Man. He wants to know how to use lead core properly, or even show how not to use it.
Okay, no problem. Lead core, used it quite extensively over the years. My favourite version of it is the ESP original one, which is this fella. The way I personally set it up is to take about an arm's length of it and cut it off the spool, and then splice a loop at each end of it. I'll show you exactly how to splice it now. A lot of people have trouble with this particular way of doing lead core. You seem to snap a lot of needles, but I'll show you a little trick now that will stop you snapping needles and end up with a perfect loop on the lead core. The first thing to do is take about, I don't know, 3 inches maybe, and pull the actual braid backwards so it exposes the lead. I don't know if you can get in on that, John, but you see how the lead's poking out of there now. You just keep feeding it back, and what you do is when you get the braid to the required length that you want it, which is like that now, if you pinch it and snap it, you can actually feel the lead break in it, which then will break out of the lead core. As you can see how it's gone floppy there now, that's actually broke the lead inside the lead core. So you remove all the lead out of it, like so, and that'll just reveal, if you bend it down like so, you can see where the lead starts now, yeah, and the braid is floppy. So what you want to do at this stage is find where the lead is and pinch your fingers on it so you've got the floppy bit. Take a splicing needle, and with the hook of the splicing needle just nick it into the inner lead core and turn your needle through so it actually goes through the centre of the lead core, like so. Push it up about, I don't know, an inch or so, and then poke the splicing needle out like so. What you do now is put the gate latch back and pull the needle just so it's like that. If you want to put a swivel on or a quick link or anything like that that's going to be on the loop, now's the time to put it onto this tag end before you actually splice it through. I'm not going to do it in this occasion because I just want it as a loop. But what you do now is you hook the hook and put the latch back like so. Now this is where most people go wrong with tying lead core, because what they do is they hold that part of it and pull the needle backwards, and that's when it has problems in terms of the braid fraying and sort of like you're not being able to do the loop, and also that's when the needle snaps. So the idea is to hold the needle firm and actually move the braid off the needle onto it so it pulls into it like so. Now what that creates is the outer braid goes in through the inner core of the braid. So I'll just rerun that again just to show you again. Push the needle through, exit it, pull it down just so it's in that position, locate the lead core into the needle, and then slowly pull gently so it goes into the inner core like so. That's popped in now. At the other end, when you've pulled it, take your baiting needle out or the splicing needle out, you'll end up with it like that, all bunched up. If you just pull the two together, what will actually happen, I'll just use this little tool, is it'll tighten all up like so. So now you've got a nice neat loop like so. One thing I always do is use Christen's Sticks brush on rig glue. The reason I like this is because it's a brush, you can be very accurate with where you want to put the super glue on it. A dropper one, you end up with big blobs of it all over the show, and it's not very accurate in terms of how much glue is being applied. So just pop that down. What you can do now is just literally have a bit of glue and you can just brush it onto it like so, right round the diameter of where you've spliced. And what I tend to do with it now is just wind it up like so. That would be done at that end as well, and then you just sort of like leave them in the air and leave them to set, just like that. And then that will actually, once it's dry, you can use that leader. Well, that's a double looped leader, that one. Like I say, if you want a swivel on it, you can put a swivel at one end to feed all your lead clips or inline leads or whatever it is that you're going to be using on it. I've just grabbed one that I've already done, which is this type of setup. So you've got your swivel in there. This one's a corkscrew swivel, lead clip and tail rubber. Feed them on with a baiting needle, just like you would do any other way, like if you're using a safe zone leader or a diffusion leader, and pull them all back down. On lead core, if I'm using an inline lead on it, I do like to use a drop-off system on it as opposed to one that would potentially run up it. I think lead core has a tendency occasionally to bunch up at one end if you're not careful in case of a crack off, and the inline lead can get stuck on it. So if you are using an inline lead, definitely use a shot leader sleeve so the lead comes off the actual sleeve and the big part of the lead, the big bore, will pass over any knots that are created in the lead core, any loops that may form. That's pretty much the safest way I use it, but you know, if I'm using an inline lead, generally speaking I'll use a drop-off system or a lead clip, one or the other.
Right, hope that answers your question, Pac-Man. We'll move on to the next question now.
Right, we've moved to the edge of the lake now for the next question.
This is off Kieran, Pikeman. When fishing a new lake, what features on the bank and underwater do you look for or find to fish to? And would you always fish the obvious spots on the far bank, such as trees, or would you rather choose your own carpy looking spots?
With most lakes I fish, I try and do as much research before I actually get there, either off forums, through magazines, people that I know fished it, etc., and try and build a picture up in my head before I get there of where the fish come from, you know, whether it's a day or night water, what sort of stock levels they are, what size of the fish they are, whether they take bait, you know, it's a bait water, or you tend to fish them on singles or little bags and just try and nick a bite here and there. So I try and get as much information as physically can prior to getting to the lake, even if I've never seen it before. On this particular lake, obviously, you look at the island, it's obviously going to be a holding spot for them. You know, there's going to be many other features on this particular lake that are going to be sort of like fish catching areas, but the most obvious one is the island, because it's a clay pond, if you like. Generally speaking, how they dig them is they just drop off at the edge, they're pretty much flat across the bottom, and then any visual features like the island are built around, you know, the way that it's excavated. On this lake in particular, there's an inlet stream over, it's just where you see the rushes coming up over there. When you walk round, you can actually see almost like a sandbar going out, and it slowly drops away. When you've been out with a marker float on there, I know that it drops off each side of it into 5 foot, and it gradually goes from sort of like inches where the inlet stream is, and then it drops off into the 5 foot, so it's almost like a bar, if you like. So that's going to be an underwater feature, the edge of the bar and each side of it, especially when the sun's out. You know, the fish will move onto them sort of areas if there's no bankside disturbance there. It's going to be a natural habitat for food coming down, obviously, as the water flow. Down to this side here, there's a little bay that cuts into the corner where the wind's blowing now. It does set fish there, mainly in the day, I found, but it's obviously going to be an area worth looking at and possibly putting a few handfuls of pellet or crushed baits in, etc., and keeping an eye on it, you know, in the edges, because with it being clay they will stir the bottom up, so it's a visual aspect of it. You know, you can keep going checking that spot and seeing if anything actually visits that spot and turns the bottom up, because it will cloud up. You can always go and stick a stalking rod in it and sneak one out of that little bay there. On this particular lake again, there is some underwater features. Again, with it being clay, the fish tend to dig little potholes out. So when you're going through the with a marker, you can actually feel them dropping into these little potholes occasionally. There's not masses of them, but they are out there. Another obvious spot. One thing I always do, especially in like in the summer, is patrol routes. You know, I do believe that how they tend to swim around the lake on the surface, they do exactly the same thing when they're feeding on the bottom at night time, etc., and use the same patrol routes. So that's worth making a mental note of. If you know, watching through the day, the angles that they're coming into certain areas at, you know, that is where they will be at night time and all. I'm a really firm believer in that. We've obviously got over this side, you can't really see them at this moment when they're in full bloom. These trees actually overhang quite considerably into the lake. Where the shelf at the bottom of the trees is the bottom of the shelf, and generally speaking, really good area for patrolling and getting a bite from. They do like to go up and down these margins. One other thing I always keep an eye out for, and all these other anglers on the bank, where they're catching from, what time of day, and try and get a mental picture of each time of the day, morning, afternoon, evening, night time, where the fish actually get caught from. I know this lake particular, it's more of a sort of like last couple of hours at night is predominantly when it produces its bites, and through the night. You can catch them through the day in certain times of the year, but predominantly speaking it is late in the afternoon, stroke evening, and especially the last couple of hours before the light drops. The fish tend to sort of like move closer into you and all, so if we're going to do the nights on here, we'll always have a rod or two in the margin, because the fish movement they do come in closer, obviously looking for that food along the marginal shelf, which it proved last night. Me and John both had a fish from out the margins, literally just out in front of us here, under arm flick, which obviously proves that theory is true. Carry a little notepad with me as well, especially with fishing a lake where I'm going to keep going back and try and record the date, the time, the spots, the pegs, the areas are caught from, the amount of bait are caught over. You get sort of like a picture over a 12-month period of, you know, the build-up of catches that you have, and that puts you in good stead if you go back to the lake the following year. You know, say in May they all come from the island or peg 10 or whatever, and it's a good starting point if the weather conditions are the same. And don't fish it with a bobbin that's heavy and actually on the line like so. The Corda Stow bobbins are quite good because they clip to the line. You can have them sat at an angle, but still have the drapes in the line. On these type of bobbins where you've got, you know, the line actually moves through the ball clips, they're a little bit harder to set a slack line. You need them lying flat on the deck. So if you want a bobbin that's actually hung, you need to get something like a Stow bobbin that clips to the line, and that will stop. It will stop the bows from going out the line in between each ring. So that's basically about it, really.
Right, the next question is from Mike Weed Camo. With so many types of rigs available nowadays, what is the one rig you would use at 90% of the time you fish? Why and how do you tie it?
Right, that's pretty much the rig that I use for 99% of my fishing. Not really much changes in it. The hook link materials, I have a braid and a coated braid. The hooks that I use are sort of like a Corda Curve, Fang Twister or a Fang X. I carry 3 sizes, which are generally an 8s, 7s and a 6. And I always fish it snowman style with silicone tubing blowback style, and silicone tubing on the actual eye of the hook for a little kicker. Now, the main reason that I fish this rig is that over the years I've tried many rigs, but this seems to always be the most effective with the least amount of up pulls. Very rarely do I suffer up pulls, and it's generally speaking quite far back in the mouth. Now, the reasons I believe that to be true is because when I fish my baits, I always try and match my bottom bait with a certain pop-up which will let the bait sit flat and the bait stands up like so, almost wafter style. Sometimes I try and balance them so they sit on the point of the hook like so. If it's a little bit choddy on the bottom, maybe a little bit bottom debris or weed or whatever, so it'll literally sit on the point of the hook like that. But generally speaking, I have them flat, where the hook's flat and the baits are lifted. The reason for that is over a period of time, water ingress on the actual baits themselves, the baits will actually start to drop in the water. So the general snowman rig would be like that, where the baits are just literally sat up, bottom baits on the bottom. I like to try and bring them just off the hair so they sit on the silicone tubing. When the fish sucks at that, obviously the baits fly in the mouth far easier, and you get a deeper hook hold as a general rule, which obviously the deeper the hook hole you get, the less chance you've got of a hook pull. I know it's not scientific, but the way I test my rigs is, obviously this is where your lead would be at that length there, and when the fish has sucked the bait in and lifted itself, actually righted itself, the little bit of the kicker there turns over and grips it. I always like a gap between the actual sort of like bend of the hook and the bottom of the bait there, a couple of mil. So that's why the hair looks a little bit longer there, because I don't like the actual bait touching the hook. The silicone tubing that I use is 0.5 tubing on the actual shank of the hook and 0.75 on the eye of the hook. Now, the reason I use 0.5 on the back of the hook is it's just the right diameter to create movement in the terms of a blowback, but it's not too tight, so it does move when it pricks the fish and it attempts to blow the bait out, but it's tight enough to hold the hair in position on the cast, etc. The reason I use tubing over, say, steel ring is I do believe that this rig teaches you what's happening, you know, in terms of the fish's behaviour and feeding patterns that they're doing, because that tubing will not move on the cast or the retrieve. The only way that tubing moves is if a fish has been hooked and it blows it back, so it's ejected the bait. So if you ever bring a rig back in this nature like so, and that tubing's gone up the shank and it's at the eye like so, it's got to be a fish that picks it up. You know, it doesn't move on the cast or the retrieve, so the only way that can actually happen is if a fish has picked it up. One thing you've got to remember with it is, obviously, when you've had a fish, if the rig's sharp and not been damaged in any way, is to move the tubing back into position. One thing I will point out on these type of rigs, if you're fishing a bottom bait, you know, the tubing tends to work better fish round the shank like so. It turns a lot quicker. I don't know if you can see that, but it's turned very deep. You know, this is the edge of the fish's mouth for argument's sake, and that turns deep. That's because the bait's creating back drag and making that point very heavy quickly. If you're fishing it like I've got it here, snowman style, what happens with it is when the fish sucks it in, it'll actually go in upside down like that. It'll actually have an adverse effect on what you try to create. Oh, there's a run. Oh no, sorry, it's ducks. Ducks are on that little plateau at the island. Right, where was we? So yeah, if you're fishing a wafter style bait or a bait that's actually lifting off the bottom, the hook will go into its mouth like that, makes it pretty much ineffective in terms of hooking the fish. But on a bottom bait, you know, you've got to imagine that that's gone into the fish's mouth, and it will lay flat in the fish's mouth once you've sucked it in, so that makes it very effective at turning the point on a bottom bait. But on a wafter, you need to bring the tubing back. It doesn't look much. You know, when you look at it, you think, well, you know, is it really that critical? But it is, because now when the fish suck it in, that bait will invert in its mouth, just like it will do when you test it in the water's edge or in a little tank or whatever. You know, when it's sat like that, making the point heavy again at that side, which is what you want. So when it goes into the fish's mouth, it'll sit like that in its mouth because it is buoyant, the bait. You know, it's not lying flat. So you know, if you're doing like a palm test, if you like, what I tend to believe is how it sits in the water is how it'll sit in the fish's mouth as well. So it'll sit like that with the tubing coming off at that angle, but as soon as you move it round like so, and you do that, you get hold of it, see how it's sitting upside down now. So the position of your tubing is very, very critical on this particular rig, whether you're fishing a wafter style bait or a bottom bait. Bottom bait's great on the edge around the bend, but you do have to move it on a wafter style, so that up point sits like that. I'll construct the rig now for you and show you how it works. This is a end trap, this particular one. Double overhand loop knots tied at the other end, so it can go onto a quick link or a quick swivel, whichever is your preferred choice. So I'll tie one of them up for you now and show you how I construct it. Take a good length of uplink material because you've got quite a bit to work with. Take about 7 inches and strip it back. Another important point when you're tying your loop, because I use a double bait, I want my knot of the loop to be in the middle of my bottom bait so it doesn't slide down towards the hair. We want the knot to actually trap it. So I've literally tying a double overhand loop knot. Again, go through it twice because braid does tend to slip, so if you go through it once you'll end up, you know, you've got a hard bait, especially when you pull the bait onto the loop, it sometimes untangles itself. So on this particular one we've got a 12mm pop up which will sit there, and that'll sit the bait right in the middle of the bottom bait. Just use a tension bar, or you can use a knot puller just to tighten everything down. Trim your tag end off. Right, next stage is to get some silicone. This is Fox's silicone that I use. Got a couple of sizes of it in here. Again, 0.75, which is the thicker one of the two. That'll be the one for the eye of the hook. And a 0.5 is the one which is a thinner one. You see the two thicknesses there. Thick one's for the eye, the thinner one's for the shank. Just take a couple and mil. And thread that onto the opposite end. Like so. Get the hook of your choice. And then what I do, the loop's at this end. I just literally bend the silicone round my thumb like so, so it pulls the hook link material to one side of the wall. Wet the point of the hook and literally just feed it through like so, and when you turn it round like that, now the hook's in position to go down towards the hair like so. Next stage is obviously the knotless knot, so we feed it through the back of the eye towards the point, pull the hair to the position that you want. Now you might want to mount a bait on this prior to it so you can get it, but obviously tied that many of them, I know that my baits will sit about there, giving me the gap that I require so the bait doesn't hit the shank of the hook. What I do here, I don't know if you can get in on this, John, little tip. A lot of people have their, when they tie the rigs, the hairs end up offset. So what I do is I pull the hair on the inside of the shank, like so. Trap it into place and then tie your knotless knot. Now I'm do 7 down and 2 back up, and that locks the knot off then for you, so it stops it contracting. Back through the eye of the hook towards the point, and this is the bit. Now when I tighten that up, and see if we can get that on camera for you, it'll actually, when you tighten it, pulls the air into position, like so. So it's actually now sat on the back of the shank, nice and neat. It's not offset and pulled to the other side. Next stage is to put a little bit of the 0.75. Take about, I don't know, 12mm maybe, something like that, 10mm. Again, just feed it down the hook link to the hook. Just wet the eye, and literally where the last coil of the knot is down the shank, that's where that goes. Don't really want it over it. I want to expose as much of that shank for the blowback to work. And they've got the little supple bit there now where we've stripped back. And another little tip that Darryl Peck showed me last year was to just to unweave the braid, because it's woven quite tight on this particular material. If you spin it backwards and forwards like that, it actually makes the braid very, very soft on that little segment, which in turn helps it turn over like so. At the other end now, I do favour longer hook links, generally about 9 inches, anywhere between 9 and 12. Literally create a loop, just like you're tying a hair, and I go through it twice, double over on loop knot basically. Like so. Wet it down, just tighten it. A double over on loop knot never slips. If you do it once, you do run the risk of it slipping. And then just tighten the knot down, like so. Leave a couple of mil of your tag end. Now depending on whether I'm putting a stick on or not, or threading anything down the hook link, if I was just casting it out as single baits, I would put 2 blobs of putty on it, but if I'm threading the stick down, the putty gets caught on the PVA and it doesn't work very well basically. I will show you what it's like with a stick on. Basically you've got your PVA stick, tend to go through the top, out the side, into the loop on a gate latch needle, pull it back through. And I always try and just create a little bit of a bore in it, like so, just so I can pull the tubing in, stick the hook point in, and then what I do is I just sort of like gently press the hook into the PVA and the stick, like so. Just give it a little neaten up, and that is pretty much my take you anywhere rig. It's caught me absolutely hundreds of carp. Very rarely do I lose them, and for me personally it's good enough to take anywhere. I do use it on braid as well, you know, just an uncoated braid, which I'm a fan of if I can get away with it. You know, I would use that as my first choice as opposed to coated braids. I just like the suppleness and the movement in the rig. The reason I use a longer hook link to what the fad is at the moment is purely and simply because, you know, the way carp feed, I've watched them for many years now, and I keep sort of like mirrors and commons in a garden pond up to about 14 £, and I feed them baits and watch how they feed over boilies and maggots and corn and emp, etc. And they tend to sort of like always drop and lift, you know, and I do believe that, you know, once that bait's gone in and they lift up, you know, it's critical to the length of the hook link to hit the lead. There's not much movement once you've sucked it in, if you've only on a short hook link, for that hook bait to go far back, you know. So that's the reason I use a hook link of approximately about 9 inches. Shown John a few hook holes last night that we had compared to the ones he's had, and you know, they were considerably deeper hook holes than he was getting on his shorter rigs. Even though we both landed the fish that we hooked, my hook holes were a lot deeper than the ones that John had, and that's only down to the length of the rig being that extra probably 3 to 4 inches longer. So that is my personal rig that I like. There's millions on the market, you know, you can play about with them and find your own. That's the one I've basically got all my confidence in, and I use it everywhere I go, whether it be in France or in England. I tie exactly the same rig up. The only thing I will change on it is a bigger bait. Got to have a bigger hook, and you've got to have a stronger hook link. You know, this particular one's £15. We're only fishing for doubles predominantly here. But if you're in France and you know, you probably go on a £25 version of it, size 4 up to a 20mm bait, or a size 6 to an 18 depending. But it will be tied up in exactly the same manner every single time, no matter what. And they have the same results in France, or whether I'm fishing a syndicate water, a runs water, everything's tied in exactly the same way.
So there's the rig, get on it. Now the next question for you, Paul, is from Johnny Vegas, Steve, and he wants to know, with the recent explosion in carp fishing that we've experienced over the last 10 years or so, do you think the bubble is close to bursting?
Personally, I don't. I hope not. Obviously, being in the tackle business, more and more people are taking it up. Lakes are getting busier, but by the same rule, there's more and more lakes appearing. You know, people are catering for the carp angler more and more, and realising that, you know, there is a market for it out there. So, in terms of it bursting, I mean, you are always going to get people that are going to leave the sport because of the busyness. But you know, modern day carp angling now, you know, you just got to accept that that's how it is. You know, unless you're lucky enough to find a walk where there's not a lot of people on it, you got to accept that lakes are getting busier. But there is more and more lakes appearing. You know, every month there's a new lake pops up somewhere, which takes a little bit of pressure off a few other ones. So I don't personally think it's close to bursting. The only thing I've noticed an increase in over the last couple of years is the amount of people wanting to go and fish for catfish. That is definitely getting more and more popular, you know, and there's more and more lakes appearing that specialise in predominantly just fishing for catfish, you know, but they're generally the carp anglers that switch over to the catfishing. So that's an area I think we'll see an increase over the next sort of like 5 to 10 years, the actual catfishing side of things. But I don't think catfishing's close to bursting at all, personally. You know, it's popular, and there's more and more people, you know, cropping up in the tackle and bait industry, which obviously means there's a market for it. Where there's a market, you know, there'll always be, you know, there'll always be popularity and people striving to make the sport better. So I hope not.
Well, hopefully, because otherwise you'll be having to close your doors, eh?
Exactly, yeah, we don't want that.
Right, the next question again from Steve is about tackle, the latest fads. People buy them, they get an exchange or re-advertise them a short time later. Have you considered yourself putting a buy or sell board up in the shop, or buying and reselling the tackle you've sold?
I'll answer the last question first. In terms of a buy and sell board in the shop, for me personally it's a little bit difficult to do. The main reason being is, if we was to sell a product that was second hand for a customer, we are then seen to be the person that you would come back to should anything go wrong with it. Because we've not actually bought it off the supplier in the first place, the problem we've got with that is that they don't often honour exchanges on it. So for argument's sake, somebody brought 3 reels in and something went wrong with them, they'd then bring them back to me expecting me to do something about them when they are actually second-hand goods. If you buy it from new, you've got all your manufacturer's guarantees with it. But for me personally, I'd have to then deal with the problem of exchanging them or refunding them. I think over a period of time you'd lose a considerable amount of money, so you know, can't afford to do that. So definitely not a second-hand market in a retail tackle shop. You know, eBay and Tackle Traders, the place to be selling that sort of stuff. As regards the latest fads, you know, there's so many companies sort of like innovating products, bringing new things out. There's a lot of it that's sort of gimmicky. There's a lot of it that people want because it's the latest must-have product. You know, us as carp anglers, we like the latest gear, we like to swap and change. We always like to try new things. I don't think there's anything wrong in that. It's like in anything in life, you know, that you see. You know, a new telly's advertised, a new mobile phone, whatever it may be. You know, as human beings, we want that product. It's the way that we sort of like work. Going back to the fishing side of it, there's definitely a few products out there that are not fads, that are, you know, well, they are initially, but I mean, I've got one here that I can think of off the top of my head. This little fella called a crusher. But is it a gimmick? I don't think it is. It's a great little bit of kit. You know, the amount of things you can do with this product, you know, it's as far as your imagination can go. I don't think it's a gimmick for 1 minute. It does actually do a job. You know, it's a cracking little bit of kit. There's a lot of things that are gimmicks out there that are just, you know, reinvented the wheel for argument's sake. And yeah, you know, you buy them thinking it's going to be something spectacular, and it actually isn't. You know, but until you actually get it and have a go with it, you know, you'll never know. But these products being developed all the time that personally I think, you know, a good percentage of them are definitely make life easier for us. Whether they catch more fish or not's debatable. You know, I don't particularly think they catch more fish, but they certainly give us options and different ways of doing things. You know, we all know that fishing's all about being different. If you do something different to what everybody else is doing, then, you know, it does catch your fish. You know, it definitely does. But, you know, in terms of like fad items, you're always going to get that. That's just life. Everything in life has a fad item. So, you know, we're always going to fall victim to that one way or another. But there are, you know, products out there that definitely do help us, you know, do what we want to achieve. You know, the old onion choppers that was brought to light by Corda. You know, there was always getting jam your baits in them and stuff like that, and then they brought the crusher out, and it just solves that problem straight away. You know, it doesn't catch any more fish, is what I'm saying, but it makes life easier on the bank, and that's, you know, what we all strive for. I hope that answers your question. I've gone a bit around the houses there, but you know, it's the best way I can explain it.
Right, the next question's from Carpy John. It's sort of 3 questions in this, so I'll ask you one at a time, give you an opportunity to answer them so you don't lose track. First one, hook size versus bait size. A question most commonly asked by anglers, and most do get it wrong.
Yep, exactly. Really critical in my opinion. The bait size to hook size has got to be spot on. The reason being is I've got here now a 20mm bait. I'll try and show you this. And basically what you've got, I've got a size 8 hook there and the 20mm bait. Now what you've basically doing is by using a small hook and a big bait, you're closing the gape of the point, because when that's mounted on a hair, if you can see that there, the point isn't really sort of like going to hit the fish in the bottom lip. You know, once it's mounted, it's going to be difficult because the gape is far smaller than the size of the bait. So when that's gone into its mouth, that point's actually above the base of the bait. So the hooking ratio of that's going to be pretty poor, especially if you're fishing a tight, you know, your hair's short and the bait's tight to the hook. On a longer hair, it'll drop down and give it more movement, so you've got a better hooking ratio on a longer hair. But as a general rule, if you're fishing a big bait, you need to step the size of the hook up to it to create the gape, so the point is nearer the base of the fish's lip. We've got a size 6. This is the rig I've just constructed, but once that's mounted on that hair, now see how the point's virtually on level with the base of it, and that's only stepping up one hook size. On a 20mm bait, I'd probably even go up to a size 4 in some circumstances, so that hook point protrudes the base of the bait. Length of hair was the other question. Always favour long hairs. As a general rule of thumb, where the bait's mounted on the actual hair, I always like to give it a gap, so if you can imagine that's gone into the fish's lip, there's a good few mil, that bait's not touching the base of it. My opinion only, you know, obviously people fish them tight up and catch plenty of fish, but me personally, I do like a longer hair. I like that hook to be able to drop down freely without anything being in the way of it. Once it's actually mounted and that fish has sucked the bait in, that hook point needs to drop down, in my opinion, as quickly as possible. As soon as that's been sucked in, that hook needs to drop down as deep as you can get it. The deeper you can get it, the better it is. So that's why I favour a long hair. On a big bait, again, you know, you've got to up your hook size. It's as simple as that. If you're fishing 2 grains of corn, for argument's sake, a size 8 will be perfect for say 2 grains of plastic, because, you know, the gape's in sync with the size of the bait. But if you're going to put bigger baits on in terms of mil, you know, you can put a double 14mm, for argument's sake, on a size 8 and it'll work fine. But, you know, if you was having a double 20mm, for argument's sake, or an 18, a size 8 wouldn't be my first choice. It'd be definitely up to a 6, just to create that drop down.
Now, I think you touched on this one earlier. The other part of the question, when you was making your rig, is how long, when and why for the hook link length?
Yeah, as a general rule, watching the fish in the margins and how they deal with things, hook link length is probably more critical, in my opinion, than anything else. You know, once you've got, say, this part of the rig sorted, you know, the next stage is the length of the hook link. It's an absolute must. If you give them too much movement, you know, you're giving them sort of like, you know, free movement to sort of like deal with it once you've felt, you know, that there is actually a hook that's pricked them. If you don't give them enough, the bait won't go into that cavity of the mouth. You know, you've got to remember that when fish are sucking bait into the mouths, they try to pass it to the pharyngeal teeth. So between the lips and, say, the gill plate where the pharyngeal teeth are, it's quite a big distance there that they want to, you know, make that bait travel. So, you know, having a longer hook link that can travel that distance makes the hooking efficiency of that rig more effective. If it's a longer hook link, it's basically got to have movement, in my opinion. This is the reason that, you know, I'm sure a lot of the people that can possibly view this, you know, a chod rig, for argument's sake, you know, there's no movement in a chod rig. It's anchored to the bottom and it's sat up. When the fish sucks at that, it spins, and, you know, there's a massive percentage of people get up pulls on chod rigs. You know, I'd say 50% of the bites you have on a chod, you lose 50% of them. You know, that is definitely a common thing on a chod rig, and the reason for that is there's no movement, and what's happening is it's a very, very efficient hooking rig, but when the fish suck it in, the rig spins very, very quickly and catches them on the outside of the lips. It doesn't go into the mouth deep enough on most occasions for the hook to travel deep, because there's no movement in it. So, you know, anyone who's a chod angler out there who's fishing them, I would sort of like hazard a guess and say you do lose a percentage of fish, or you get drop runs, you know, where you get a screaming take, you pick your rod up and it bumps off straight away, and that's because the hook's turned but only hit it, you know, on the outside of the lips. You've not actually got a decent purchase point on it. So, you know, that's the reason really I like a longer hook link. As in how and where and why you would use a longer hook link over a shorter one, experience will tell you more than anything. But, you know, when you cast a bare lead out and you feel the bottom, you know, if it's a thud or the donk as they call it, then you know, you will get away with a shorter uplink. You know, a 7-inch version of it, you know, is a great starting point if it's solid on the bottom. But if that lead's plugging in any description, try and gauge the depth that it's plugging in. It's not something you can explain. It's more of an experience thing. You know, when you feel different depths that you're actually fishing in, you can tend to gauge how long your uplink is. There's no way of explaining it unless you sort of like practice it. There's a place called Pendle View in Clitheroe, and that's got, you cast a bare lead out and you reel it in, and it doesn't feel like it's plugged in very much at all. But if you leave it in for half an hour and then reel it, it's almost like it's a sinking silt. So, you know, when I fish Pendle View, you know, you actually put your rods out. When you pick your rods up, it seems to have plugged in 10 times much as when you sort of like you're plumbing for spots, you know, with a marker rod or just a bare lead and leading about. It's like a sinking silt. So that knowledge that you gain off experience on feeling that type of resistance once your baits have been in the water, initially told me to stick another 4 inches on my rig, because that lead is sinking deeper and deeper the longer it's in the lake. It's almost like, you know, as the sediment's moving, you know, your lead sinks into it. Like on this lake, because it's clay, it's pretty firm. You know, you can pretty much feel your lead's hitting the bottom and donking down. So, you know, something like that's perfect for it. You know, it's not sinking the lead in, and the uplink will be laid with a little bit of movement for it to go in its mouth. If you're weed fishing again, or if you've got a little bit of blanket weed, if you was to cast that into blanket weed and it was sinking 6 inches, you'd only have predominantly that much left on it, you know, on the actual surface of, you know, of the weed. You know, with your bait sat like that, now that's got no movement in that. So by me putting another 3 inches into it, there'd be that much. So, you know, it can go into the fish's mouth a lot easier. So it's gauging what you're fishing on to the length of your uplink. I would adjust it accordingly. That's what I would class as a hard bottom hook link, and then I would adjust it longer and longer depending on what I feel.
Now, back to the hook link choice as well, of material.
Yep.
You're saying about movement. Where would it be ideal to use a fluorocarbon straight through, like such as IQ?
Fluorocarbon uplinks, I used them quite a lot in the early 90s. Fluorocarbon, with mixed results. Caught a lot of fish on them, but there was opportunities I thought that I should have caught some more fish on, you know, pretty pressured water. Not easy to catch the fish out of, but you know, when they was having it, you could, you know, they were quite easy to catch. But so it's one of them waters that, you know, you'd sit on for a long period of time with no activity, and then they'd switch on, the conditions would be right, and you could catch them quite, you know, one after another. The trouble with fluorocarbon for me is this segment here, all this movement is really important in the way that I fish. Fluorocarbon's more suited to bottom baits. I would definitely not fish wafters or anything buoyant on a fluorocarbon uplink unless the hair was supple. You know, the stiff hairs for me personally definitely got to be fished hard on the bottom. The main reason I think that is, if you fish a fluorocarbon, I'm always paranoid about this looping up segment of it, you know, giving it one of them sort of things. You know, if that lead's stuck in, you know, you're gonna end up with a bait sat like that. Now fluorocarbon predominantly would sit something like that unless you've got big blobs of putty on it or something similar, you know, to keel it over. Great for distance work, you know, where tangles may be concerned, you know, and you know, you've got no option but to use something like that. But the problem with fluorocarbon as well for me is because I use sort of like hooks with sort of like 10-degree inturned eyes, the angle they come off at's like that, you know, because it's a stiff material, it points it off at the wrong angle, so you're then having to mess around with sort of like shrink tubing to bring it back out to create that sort of angle. You're closing the gap up really, in essence. So fluorocarbon ain't my particular first choice. You know, visibility side of it is probably good, anti-tangle at range it's probably good, but you know, not really something I use, you know, anymore.
Right, the next question's from Dan, Carp Fanatic. Surface fishing question. Bit of an avid surface angler himself. He's caught a few nice fish doing it. And his question is, when surface fishing, What reaction are you looking for before introducing a hook bait?
Basically, in surface fishing, you're trying to get the fish feeding quite competitively. You know, the more aggressive you can get them taking the free offerings, the better it'll be, you know, in terms of catching one. One thing that I have sort of like been taught over the years is by a lad called John Finch when we was fishing Christchurch on Link Chill. Absolute master at surface fishing. Basically the trick behind it was to use small floating pellets as your first introduction of feed. So he was using like 4mm expanders, get them going on them, then introduce a 6mm, and then basically build it up from then on till you sort of like getting your upbait size, your chum mixers for argument's sake. You know, he absolutely had them in a frenzy. You know, you're talking big pressured fish here. The main thing is the competitiveness of them. Got them absolutely in a frenzy over those 4mm and 6mm, and then carried on adding them to it, but with the odd inclusion of some bigger ones. And then when they started picking the bigger ones, then just introducing the bigger ones. So the main thing is with floater fishing is to try and get them absolutely in a frenzy and just dropping the guard, just wanting to suck everything, you know, and not have the chance to pick the upbait out. I personally get frustrated with floater fishing. I'm not something I'm particularly good at, to be fair. Catch me fair few on it, but when you see somebody like John doing it, you know, you realise that, you know, it takes a lot of patience. You know, he can be feeding them for hours and hours and hours on end, and you know, before he's even cast the rod out, you know, he can spend 4-6 hours just sat there feeding them, you know, before the time's right. But when the time's right, he'll catch one after the other. So I suppose the biggest edge I can give you is one, getting them in a frenzy, and two, start off on small pellets, because they do accept them a lot quicker than chum mixers. You know, them small pellets definitely are an edge, without a shadow of a doubt.
Next question's from Malk Grumpy. He's one of the moderators on the forum. Your rods are out and you're set up on your pod or bank sticks. You're either sat near your rods or lay down in your bivvy, and his question basically is one bleep on the alarm, what would you do?
20 years ago I'd have probably got up and had a look at it. These days, roll over and go back to sleep, I suppose, is the answer. I'm not that confident that when I get a pickup I get some more positive reaction out my indicator system. The fact that I use sort of like 4-ounce leads, probably minimum's the size that I use. One bleep, generally speaking, doesn't really mean a lot these days to me personally. If I'm fishing somewhere that's an ultra riggy water, then that's different. Definitely get up and have a look at it. Generally speaking, I would have a look at the line movement, you know, off the rod tip, see if there's sort of like any sort of like depression in the rod, you know, where something's on the end of it, you know, when it is actually pulling at the line, but not enough to create a lot of bobbing action or even sounds from the alarm. Occasionally I have had fish on where, you know, you've literally had a bleep and that's it. You know, that you've literally got one bleep, Link Chill being one of them, the Christchurch Lake. It was at one point literally a one bleep water, you know, for a certain amount of time. You had to hit them, but generally speaking that was in the day. This day and age now, the single bleeps, I'm not happy with me rigs and my setup. You know, the heavy leads, I don't think they deal with heavy leads in you know, especially 4 ounces. Just don't think they get away with them as easy. You know, it's something they can't shed. So you know, generally speaking, you'll get at least a bobbing pulling in a series of bleeps, you know, where it will register sort of like more activity in terms of something's on there. So I probably won't get up to them, is the honest answer.
Next question comes from Dangler Martin, and he basically wants to know, would you fill it in or little and often?
The approach I have, no matter where I go, is literally first cast on all rods is one of them, a stick or a bag, a bite basically. What I tend to do from there on in, if I get a bite on that that presentation, I'll put it back out again. If I get another bite, they'll then introduce a little bit of feed, you know, whether it be a spod full of hemp, or you know, half a dozen boilies with a throwing stick, or a pouch full with a catapult. If I then get a bite again, I'll double the amount. So for argument's sake, I put that out, I've had 2 fish, my third fish has been caught over, say, you know, a pouch full of boilies. I will then go to 2 pouchfuls of boilies, and sort of like time the reactions that you get in your bite. So if you're getting a bite every half an hour, or every hour for argument's sake, or every 3 hours, whatever it is, I build what I pretty much class as a pyramid. I start off at the bottom with that low, and then I build a pyramid into a baiting level that I stop getting the bites, or they're taking longer, and sort of like you've reached your optimum. Then once I've reached my optimum, I then back off and put the amount in where I was getting consistent bites. Never really, unless it's a water that I absolutely know for a fact that they love a lot of bait and I've got a session there. One of the biggest mistakes people make that I see is they go in and they fill it in. You know, I was on here probably 2 winters ago, and there's a guy on the opposite bank. He must have threw, you know, it's literally frost on the ground, single up bait tactics with what we're scoring. Me and my mate I think we had 9 fish that day between us, all to single up baits, and that guy wasn't fishing that far from us, but the first thing he did was put about 3 kilo of boilers over 1 rod, and I just thought, you've just killed your chances. You know, as soon as he got there, rod was out, filled it in, and I just knew for a fact that he wasn't going to get a bite. You know, it's reading the conditions and try to understand, you know, on the given day how much bait they want, and it's pretty difficult to gauge how much bait they want on a given day, because every day is different. So I always start off with a little stick like so and build it up from there. You know, it's a way of a fish for quite a lot of time now, and try and get bites to start with. You know, the problem being is if they're just picking at the odd bait here and there, and you're only there for a day session, and you've put, you know, a kilo of bait out, you know, you basically ruin your chances unless you're really lucky. I always think the up baits are one of the last to go out of a baited area as a general rule. You know, they tend to eat everything else and set your up bait pretty much last. So you know, my personal choice is don't fill it in, start getting bites, and then start introducing small amounts more till you reach a level where the bites start tapering off, because the fish are feeding over bigger volumes of bait, and then drop it back to what's acceptable.
Right, the next question again from Martin Dangler. He wants to know slack or bowstring tight lines, benefits and drawbacks.
Slack lines seem to be the fad. You know, it's the latest craze in terms of how you're going to set everything up. Personally, I don't really see the benefits of having a line completely slack from the rod tip fished at range. You know, I mean, there's a lot of DVDs out there at the moment off the tackle manufacturers that advocate, you know, slack lines at 120 yards. Great if it works for you, and that's the type of, you know, setup you prefer. But me personally, I think you're just giving the fish so much movement to kite about, you know, in a massive expanse of water where, you know, they can run 30 yards with, you know, and then get a registration at the buzzer. Great if that's, you know, if that's the type of venue you're fishing. But personally, I don't think slack lines are the way forward. The main reason being is the fish can kite great distances without you getting any bleeps on the indicator. You know, it's as simple as that. I don't advocate a bowstring tight line by any means, but you know, my own way of setting up is, you know, you cast out, you'll sink your line and break it through the surface film. You'll obviously feed some line off, put it onto your pod, maybe take a foot of line which will sink your leader or your lead core, your tubing, whatever you're using, and then the weight of your bobbin will take that little bit of slack from the rod tip, you know, that goes into the water, and anything through the rings of the rod. We had a pretty lengthy conversation, me and you, yesterday, John, about it, and you have been fishing slack lines yourself, and you had a bit of an occurrence on your rod which you didn't hit, which turned out to then register on your other rod, and basically the fish had kited probably I don't know what's that, 20 yards and from one rod into the other rod, which basically is exactly what I've just explained does happen with you know, slack lines, you know, where everything's sort of like pinned to the deck. I don't think you want everything dead tight to the lead, because you know the fish feeding in the area do believe that if they touch lines then they do get, you know, a bit nervous around them. So you want, you know, that maybe a rod length or even two past your lead and baited area, you want your lines pretty much pinned down. But after that I do believe they can come up. You know, if you've got line bites happening, you know, you're fishing at 60 yards range and they're hitting the line that's coming up at say 30 yards and nowhere near your up baits anyway, so if you spook them off that area, I don't particularly think that, you know, it's going to stop you getting a bite. You know, it's round that sort of like that feeding zone. You know, if you can imagine a 20-foot circle around your feeding zone, you know, the 10-foot that your line's running through it, you know, if you can get that bit down, I think that's the most important part of it. So you know, bite detection is far superior on a semi-slack line than a completely slack line, in my opinion.
And I think actually, Paul, this is now the last question by Johnny Vegas, and he'd like to know, how would you approach starting out on a new long-term venue?
Okay, like I said earlier on the other question we had on features and so on, and starting, you know, never seen a lake before, homework prior to getting there. You know, when they're getting caught, is there certain times of year, you know, in the spring did they predominantly all the big uns come out? You know, building up basically a portfolio of what happens on the lake and try to fish it in them sort of like, you know, the pinnacle periods in the year. Definitely an important factor, because you need your rods in the water when it's most likely to do the most fish. Feeding them, obviously if you can get spots going and introducing your bait, I mean there's so many different factors involved in terms of, you know, the ways to approach a lake. Every lake will be different, so there's no precise answer that I can give you in terms of, you know, do this and it will work everywhere you go. I mean, a syndicate water that I'm in, I approach it different to other people. I just literally just empty it to death, you know, put loads and loads of same spot. There's only 30 fish out of it, and I had 9 out in a day session, and 2 of them don't get caught very often. They only like every 2 years they come out, and I had 2 of them in a day session. So, you know, I approached that particular lake, you know, just by letting them dig a crater out of the lake bed. You know, was fortunate that we've got a rowing boat there, so we can literally just pour it over the side and create, you know, a real tight baiting spot and really gain the confidence on it. But, you know, again, size of the water, fish stocks, angler pressure, are you going to be able to get in the same swim every time you go? You know, what weather conditions do they come out to? Do you get a weed growth? You know, what the natural foods like there? You know, is there an explosion in sort of like Daphne, or you've got a lot of snails or shrimp? Or, you know, there's so many factors involved in every particular lake. It's really hard to pinpoint one precise sort of like answer to that particular question. But the biggest thing is do your own work on it and really think about what you could do different to the norm. You know, if it's boilie only and everybody's piling boilies in it, you know, maybe going with the Emp and maybe mini tigers, something like that a little bit different to what everybody else is doing. Solid bag fishing and all, really big fan of solid bags. Caught so many fish over them over the years. You know, you can scald pellets up, put them out with bait slings, things like that, and create like a patchy baited area of what you're mimicking with your solid bag. I've had mega success on likes of Oxlease, for argument's sake, you know, where we was blasting solid bags at about 110 yards and baiting a massive sort of like area within your swim just randomly with these sort of like big balls of scalded pellet, you know, mimicking what, you know, what was putting in the bags. And they were just coming across these piles of, you know, of scalded pellet, and when your bag was in amongst it, it just didn't sort of like show any suspicion. You know, everybody was spodding on there. We did something a little bit different and so, you know, went with the pellets rather than the Emp and plastic corn, which was the the main thing people were catching on at the time, and absolutely slayed it. You know, we was having 40, 50 fish catches, a dozen 20s mixed in with that, upper 20s, you know, and we really did do the business. So that's sort of like an example of being different, I suppose. Every water will respond to its own way, find out what that is, find out the spots are getting caught from, the times of the years are getting caught from, whether you can introduce bait to them waters, you know, on a regular basis, you know, if that's within your budget to do, you know, and fish it slightly different to what everybody else is doing. Just try and be a little bit different.
I'll throw a question out there for you, Paul, one that you do often find asked, especially on forums, is recommend a bait, one boiler, one only, that you take anywhere.
Okay, in terms of a bait, I'll start off with my own personal choice. What I use is Nash's Sculpet Squid Original, and sort of like the revived version of it, the latest one, which is Sculpet Squid Red. What I basically do with these is a mix them 50-50, so you know, a bag of each of them, for argument's sake, will go into a tub and mixed evenly. The reason I do that is that I think the colours confuse fish a little bit. You know, obviously the addition of Robin Red, a slightly different attractor. I mean, a lot of people tend to think that we're on wonder baits or something you can't get hold of, or we do something in the industry, you know, the tackle guys, you know, they have something special. They might be on a new bait that's due for release, but it is, you know, due for everyone. But that's my bait of choice, Nash's Sculpet Squid and Red. Been around for, I don't know what that's been around for, 18, 20 years. My personal view on bait, if a bait was good 20 years ago, it'll still be good to this day. I don't think, personally, you know, that you need to swap and change baits. I mean, I've been on that now for, I don't know, 2 or 3 years. I'll take it anywhere, been literally everywhere to go with it. The beauty of that is that, you know, you've got additions these days, like, you know, your soluble balls, great for sort of like putting carpets of feed out, but without overfeeding them. You know, they dissolve, can go out in a throwing stick, a catapult, put them in PVA bags, etc, etc. So soluble balls are a good addition to my fishing. I've not brought any with me, but like your chain reaction, these are the new rock salt ones that Nash has just done. But the chain reactions, again, you know, dead easy to slide down the uplink, break down quickly, give out loads of attraction, but not actually feeding the fish. So, you know, whereas we've got a stick on that one, 2 or 3 of these chain reactions work an absolute treat as well. I've been using these for probably a couple of years now, got loads of fish over them, they work. Upbait wise, I mean, God, this day and age upbait wise is absolutely hundreds and hundreds of options on them. Me personally, again, snowman rig, so that's basically a Sculpet Squid bottom bait with a white chocolate pop up on it. You know, that works. It's very, very visual. It's a great combination in terms of size. You know, it balances well. These additions are things like these ones. These are Triple S from Slayer Baits. What they've got here now, they've rolled some, I don't know if you can see them, but like barrels in the glug. Really attractive. Smell really, really nice. Something different, you know, not a lot of people tend to use something like that, but glugged up baits, definitely something I advocate. These ones are Frank Warrett's. These are these little wafter barrels. I'm quite a fan of these buoyant type wafter up baits, so these little barrels, great when I'm solid bag fishing. I actually had a fish on these last night as well, just fished on their own with a little tiny stick attached to them, like what the other one is. Come in loads of different shapes and sizes. I mean, that's a mini barrel, you can see that, little tiny one, so if you want to scale things down a little bit you can do, but they're the ones that I tend to put on, you know, when I'm fishing them. We've got all sorts of little bits and pieces in terms of tricks to do. These are what I tend to do with my Sculpet Squid and Red, if I can show you that. Basically, we've got barrels in there, we've got round ones, these 10 millis, these tiny little barrels in there. Tend to mix them up. Obviously no good mixing them like this if you're using just purely a throwing stick, but you know, if you're using something like a bait boat or you're spodding them in with a spom, something like that, I like mixing the sizes up, I like mixing the colours up. What I do with my freebies, which is a little bit different, I use these by Nash, they're called the Rousers. They come in all the major flavours. This particular one's a Sculpet Squid Red. But I don't know if you can see that, see how you've got the separation there? And what that is pretty much half oil and half attractor. So when they shook up, they mix together and create, you know, a really attractive liquid. But they're very, very oily, these, so what I tend to do with them is I just pour them in the bag and just squirt them over my baits. You're basically boosting them like you would do with a dip or whatever. But what happens with them, when they're in the water, these, and you know, I soak them a couple of weeks prior to going, but when they're in the water you can see them pimpling and create little flat spots, especially when fish move over them and start eating them. If you're fishing over them all like a bed of them, you tend to get all these little flat spots coming up, you know, in the wind, and you know that fish are feeding on your spot, so you know. Oh, that's going, that, John. I'll take over as cameraman. A live run.
Another one on the Johnny Mac rig there.
Is that what you're fishing on?
Yep.
Where was that one fish? Is that the margin one?
No, that put this on the bar.
Right.
It comes off the back of the island, the far bank. Doesn't feel very big, maybe another float in the bubble.
That sun's come out now, hasn't it? Yeah. Just moved them up on that shallow a bit.
See, the first thing I noticed about that run, what we was talking before about this.
It wasn't twitchy, was it?
No, it wasn't a twitchy take, a sort of semi-tight or semi-slack.
Yeah.
However you want to.
Well, you had 2 bites on slack lines, and they was very, very finicky, weren't they, last night? You know.
Very positive.
And now you've moved to that sort of like semi-slack. You know, they just. That's the difference that I believe, you know, it makes in terms of your bite indication.
Banging its head. Not seeing it yet, it's still low down.
They fight more in the margins here, don't they? This is where they start doing you.
That was on a long hook link, longer Johnny Mac rig as well.
Was it?
The one that I had last night was a short. This was a longer one, so we can see where the hook hole is
Yeah.
as well.
Well, that one last night was hooked barely on the, well, just on this sort of like barely on the inside one. It so, you know, just with the addition of a longer hook link, we'll see if we've got a better hook hold on it.
You grab my net from the please.
Yeah, slide mine across here, mate. Easy for you.
on this one.
Hey, they just do you up and down that shelf, don't they? They're common. Easy. You happy with that, son?
Yeah, sound that.
Another one. Right, thanks for watching our first attempt at bringing some answers to the questions you've asked us. Appreciate everybody who's sent us questions. If there's anything else you'd like us to do, if you like it, obviously let us know on the forum, and we'll endeavour to do another one pretty soon. Thanks for watching, bye.